It's time for us to check back in with the 9 brides in Granny Hite and see what happens next. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. The road split, one fork of it wandering off to the left toward a huddle of buildings. She thought, I wonder if that's it. I suppose I could stand it, though it's terribly far from things. But he grunted, Belle Gunderson lives there. She'll be your neighbor. And the wagon creaked on, turning to the right, and dipped down into the stream, which was running high. She thought, we're going to cross it, and without a bridge. And again, she was mistaken. We'll ford it endwise for a spell. It was like climbing a mountain in a boat. The angular horse slewed them around big boulders and over sunken ones. She gripped the handrail. Even so, she was frequently hoisted. The endwise ford lasted for a mile. She decided, using for yardstick her memory of the exercise yard, which had been 200 feet. Then the horse paused for strength, reared its front feet, and wrenched the wagon up to new ground. She found her nose and forehead buried against the driver's coarse coat, which smelled of pitch pine and barnyard. She righted herself primly. He drew the horse to a halt, waited until its lathered side stopped heaving, and said, Water's riz. Another hour, and we'd have had to camp. She was too battered to reply. She had no retort to make anyhow. She had never camped, had no idea how the business was managed. She only knew she had escaped one experience and was now being hauled toward something probably much worse. He brought forth a twist of chewing tobacco. She loathed such tobacco. There'd been a jailer who had a hideous way of stuffing his cheek, a bumptious fellow whom the prison women called Paul Pry. She had always associated the chewing habit with Paul Pry, with his confidential, insulting manner, his habit of standing much too close when he spoke to you, and his assumption that you liked it and were thrilled by it. She had once heard of an unruly woman prisoner who had been taken away to another institution by Paul Pry. Shackled to him, the mere thought of that inescapable contact, that closeness of his flesh and breath, had always revolted her. Was she, merciful heavens, by her own free will, already shackled to this bigger, graver, completely strange man? Well, wasn't she? He put the tobacco back in his pocket, unbitten. They lurched on over a pair of ruts on tilted moss. She clung to the seat, shifting her hip occasionally to relieve the bone pressure. The driver commented, It's nice here on the moss. The back smote her, and she said nothing, deciding that she was doing pretty well just by not crying out in pain. The mist parted, and she looked down and down and down. This time she did cry out. She had never looked down upon hilltops before, nor upon a cloud, and the sun was on all of it. The wagon continued grinding upward, following the edge of an abyss. It made her ill. She closed her eyes. That made the pitch and sway seem worse. She opened her eyes, and the man beside her, ignoring the cliff, was fumbling behind him, reaching into the bed of the wagon. He found and lifted a paper sack. He drew a thick sandwich out and poked it at her. Ready for a snack? No. He eyed her without speaking his thought and bit into the slabs of bread. The horse jogged on. She sat, sunk in wretchedness. Her companion's eyes stayed fixed on the horse's ears. The chill thawed. The air grew lighter. Altitude and hunger, for she found she was hungry now, made her somewhat faint. It was impossible, she told herself, for the wagon to take them much higher. Already they were almost detached from the planet. They were like birds. How far do we still have to go? We're about halfway. They turned out upon a sky meadow ringed with trees, and he pulled and said, Time to rest the horse. You can get down and stretch. She stood a moment in uncertainty. She wandered off, through a thicket and into another meadow spotted with flowers and humming with bees. She, who had known only city smells and prison smells, stopped and breathed timidly. as if savoring a stolen treat. But realizing that this sweetness was all about her, and unlimited and free, she drew it in deeply. She felt again the giddiness of altitude, thin air, and hunger. But she felt grubby too, and in this fresh, clean place. The little brook danced down through her meadow, spreading its pretty skirts, curving between flowery hummocks. She cast a quick glance about. The trees were a solid ring of guards, but they were not Paul Pry's. They were solemn, indifferent. She pulled her dress off over her head, shed the rest, and crouched behind a log and let herself down. The water was chill. She tried to dip slowly, but the ribbed bark broke under her fingers. She smashed back flat into the brook. She went under to nose and shoulders before she could claw and struggle out. Gasping, she rubbed off the glistening drops with her hands. Her slip was grimy, but she snatched it up and toweled off, and dived into her dress, which covered her up and warmed her, and sitting in that, she scrubbed and rinsed her undergarments and socks and spread them about in the sun. She felt reborn. If she only had a comb, not to impress that man, but to restore her pride. She went to the woods and plucked some berries and tried them on her lips over a still pool in the brook. She brought order to her hair in that same mirror. She became aware of a new odor of burning wood. She heard a shot. The thunder of it shocked her. She sprang to her feet. She heard him hallooing to her, calling that he had knocked down a pheasant, that a meal was preparing. Swiftly she got into her things, now dry, and pushed back through the thickets to where she'd left him. He pointed to her chunk of pheasant on a green stick, broiled over smoky wood. It was the grandest morsel she ever nibbled. His back had been turned when she emerged. It was turned again while she ate. He was rubbing salve on a welt on the horse's hip, but now he faced about and viewed her in her freshened state and seemed a bit surprised. He reharnessed the horse. He signed her to climb up to her seat. In spite of torment in her flesh and joints, she went up over hub and step and sideboard without the help of his palm. Her bone points, unrelieved by salve, resumed their torture. The wheels whispered through grasses, grated over rocks, skirted brinks. The horse's hips rose and fell. His flanks sawed forward and back. It didn't seem possible that a mountain could retreat back and up like this. It became about 2 o'clock, she judged. The sun was at an angle, which had meant that she would have 10 minutes rest in the yard of the prison laundry. It had slanted like this over the guard tower. The man beside her cleared his throat. He remarked, "Here it be." They swung around a knoll, and there was another sky meadow, rimmed 3 sides around by a drop-off. A gray shack and a single great tree held the center of the level stage. Beyond lay the whole world, swimming in distance, miles and miles of it, and all below. She was struck numb. Nothing in her imagination had readied her for this remoteness. Here was surely no place of human habitation. This was for dwellers on the moon. She sat in stark unbelief. His eyes stayed straight ahead. "You don't like it?" "No." It seemed to be the answer he'd expected. "The house ain't much," he admitted. She thought so too. "She?" "Vonnie, the one that died." He pointed whip. "She's over there." Her eyes followed to a square of split-rail fencing around a log platform, drably weathered. A vine straggled over it. So there had been another, an earlier captive, carried here and held here until she found the one sure way of escape. What did she die of? Loneliness, of course. But he answered, "She almost had a baby." "In this wild spot?" He added gently, "I put logs over her, account of wild animals and rain and snow." The wagon moved forward again. It passed under the great tree, whose lowest arm, thick and horizontal, was fully 30 feet above the ground. 2 iron rings, rusted, were set in the massive limb. Her eyes caught them in passing, but they had no meaning for her. Some mysterious farm operation, she supposed, required them there. They reached the house. Its doors was of vertical slabs, its wall of logs set on their sides. The gray of time was on it all. Walls and door and chimney, they had sprung from the breast of the mountain, and they would settle back into the mountain, as this man had done and would do, as that woman in her grave and her never-born babe had done. The awesomeness of the spot almost overwhelmed her, she who was used to people, elbow to elbow, and structures packed brick against brick. He paid her full glance this time. "Reckon you'd like to go in and look around?" "No, oh, no." He didn't seem surprised. He almost seemed relieved, as if bringing her here had been a duty, now discharged, or as if being braced for her verdict he could take it quite reasonably as a roof takes wind and snow. He said quietly, "I can understand." She felt that way too, and she was born in these mountains, a few miles up Big Piney River, but she always wanted to get away from it, and she finally did. But I wouldn't know how to make a living anywhere else, and I wouldn't want to. We can get back to town for the midnight bus if we start right soon. I'll give you your fare to where you come from and something for your time. I'll catch up another horse and put him to this rig." "Yes, thank you, that will be best." So he was fair, he was square. He unhitched and led away the nag that had pulled them to this spot, sending it off to pasture with a friendly cuff. Cold Trivet disappeared around the hill. He returned, leading another nag. He tossed the harness over it and backed it between the shafts. Thought of her bones and hours more of pounding on the hard seat almost finished her. She was one long bruise and ache. She had to stretch. She said, "Wait, I'm climbing down a moment." She tried to swing down lightly, but she used the wrong foot. She would have tumbled, but his long arm shot up. He caught her forearm, and on that great strength of his, she floated to the ground. He dropped her arm as if touching her had been no man's privilege. She said to divert his eyes, which were fixed upon her. For that much he permitted himself. "Aren't you going to unload the wagon?" "No, ma'am. I'll ship that stuff anywhere you say." "Ship what? I have nothing there but my hand luggage." His eyes didn't leave her. He blurted, "My, you're pretty." She stepped back. Her complete dependence upon the honor, the hoped-for worthiness of this man came to her again with force. Their aloneness together had lasted for 9 hours, but at least he had had the decency up to now to spare her any love-making. But he was coveting her. He was almost beyond whatever iron grip he had kept on himself, a grip she had sensed from the time they had picnicked in the lower meadow. In a surge of alarm, she put space between them, hiding her fright. I do think I'll look in the house," she said. Houses and walls to her spelled protection. She'd barricade the door until the overdue preacher came, and make him ride down with them, if he came, if this promised coming was not mere pretense, if his very existence was not a fraud, a schemeful hoax added to that letter. She was inside. She flung the thick door shut, putting her back to it. She found the bar and threw it into its socket. Panting, she stood, taking bearings. It was grayish dark in there, the dimness of a room with a single tiny window. The floor, she made out, was of slabs. There was a rude bed in a corner. There was a rough table, 3 stools, and one more stool, higher than the rest, with a back to it. There were cups, plates, knives, and forks set out for 4, and one plate and cup were smaller and of gay design. So the table was set for a party, and it must be a wedding breakfast, with one of the 4 places for the preacher, and the other, she realized now, for Robert. Her eyes, growing big as they adjusted to the half-dark, took in more. A trundle bed beside the large one, a homemade bed of peeled sticks dried by time. Against one wall, a sled, its hand grips and runners rubbed down velvet smooth. Beneath it, a pair of little soft leather boots, evidently handmade, and leather chaps. Ranged also on the floor, a set of whittled soldiers, a whole company of them, half the lot of bright new wood as if they'd been lately carved. Understanding leaped into her mind. She fumbled for the door bar. She swung it upright. She marched out. She went straight to the wagon. She reached among its heaped bundles and ripped at the thick paper wrappings. An aluminum toy tractor, a wind-up engine, and yards of track. A baseball bat and a padded glove, a basketball, an air gun, a wide hat, 2 toy pistols, and a sheriff's badge. She spun on the startled man. She saw it all now. "You wanted Robert!" He flushed. The red hue struck down into his neck and rose to his ears. She regarded that coil of rope. She looked from it to the huge tree with the 2 iron rings on its lofty branch. "You meant to make him a swing. You set those rings up there for that other, the one that never was born, but you bought new rope for Robert. As if this whole place wasn't dangling from the moon, you wanted to swing him higher." He stood before her like a great shame-faced boy. "You didn't care 2 pins what I looked like. It was the boy you yearned for. Your disappointment was because I didn't have him with me." He found his tongue. "I didn't allow you would count for much in looks, and that was all right with me. Yes'm, it was the boy. Him and me would have had a right smart of fun together. Why, we would have started in today. There's fishing and cooning and sledding down grassy hillsides. There's frogging and bird's egging and playing catch. I'm sorry if I didn't hide it from you that I was sore, but you never mentioned him, so I figured that you'd given him away, or he was just a lie. Here comes Preacher Martin now. I'll tell him that he can cut right along, that you aren't staying." But the trotting hoofs that his ears had caught did not herald the pastor. A shaggy little horse, not much bigger than a pony, rounded the knoll and stopped, looking disappointed the way the hillman had looked earlier this day. She recalled the saddle that was beside the coil of bright rope. The saddle was small. It was just right for a child and a pony. She scanned with new eyes this man who had had so much interest in gaining a son that he'd almost overlooked the mother, and who now, by the tumult in his own eyes, was in a fair way to momentarily forget the son. It was time to get back to first principles. "Robert," she informed, "will be here in 1 week, as soon as I can get word to the authorities that the house is ready for them to see." He was all man, this Cole Trevitt, she realized, tall and strong and kind, and with this sudden fierce joy in his eyes, almost good-looking. He was everything she had hoped for, and more. How much more? "I'll start getting my first meal in our house, Cole Trevitt, while you watch for the preacher." Happy ending once again to one of the 9 brides, one of their love stories there that they shared. This one really kind of had a surprise ending, thinking the whole time that maybe he was mean. Of course, we knew about Cole from earlier in the book when Dr. Peeler was telling the story of the young wife he had, Vonnie, and then that she died, and they were all mad at Dr. Peeler about it. But really a happy ending in this one. The very beginning of the part we read today, wouldn't you just have loved to have seen the house and seen where it was sitting, and the talk of them driving? You know, she keeps thinking, how can we keep going up? We can see the clouds already. But especially the part where they didn't just ford right across the creek, they went straight up it. Wouldn't that have been beautiful? You can just imagine those meadows, those high meadows. If you've ever had the good fortune of seeing one of those high meadows on tops of mountains, they are stunningly beautiful for sure. So I wish I could have seen all that. Even the moss that they talked about, he was saying he was trying to talk to her and said that the moss was nicer to drive on. I really love moss. It's one of my favorite things, one of the most pretty things I think of here in the mountains where I live. So I really loved that part. Interesting that she was scared. I would be scared. I'm scared of heights too, so I've been up on tall mountains before, but I don't know if I'd like it the way she was describing it. I'm not sure I'd like that either. So she was afraid about falling off. And even the way she described the air, so she'd been in the prison and she'd been in the city, so she never had really had ample access to that beautiful clean mountain air, so she was really interested in that, and then really revived by it too. And of course, the one place where they stopped, she snuck off and took her a little dip in the creek. I liked that part. If you've ever had the pleasure to do that, you know, there's all kinds of people today that do the like cold plunge or polar plunge or something they call it, like for therapy. It's supposed to be really good for you. Some people even buy like a trough, and then they can just leave cold water in it outside or whatever, and or fill it with ice or whatever they do. I'm not sure, but they do it because it's supposed to make you feel better after you get out. I've never done that necessarily for my health, but back in the day when me and Matt used to camp way back in the mountains, a lot of times on horses, sometimes it'd be this time of the year, it's awful cold, but after 3 or 4 days of being in a camp, you do feel just so grimy, you want to get clean. And so I've been in those cold mountain creeks and took a little bath, and it's almost more than you can stand. It's so cold, but once you get your clothes back on, you feel so good, you feel so relaxed. It's just so wonderful, just like she described. And then right after her bath, of course, then she got to eat something really good. So he'd killed a pheasant and roasted it there for her, and she was saying she had never tasted anything that good. It might be because, you know, she was used to the prison food, and maybe before that she just didn't have very good food. But there is something, again, about being outside and eating. You could just eat a bologna sandwich, and if you're outside, it tastes so much better. Someone in one of my videos when I was talking about that said it was because, they thought it was because, like, the fresh air and everything intensifies your senses of your taste buds, and that they thought that was why. I don't know, but I do know that things taste better when you think about camping. And like I said, it can just be a sandwich, but it tastes so good. It just tastes so much better when you eat outside. So she got to taste the pheasant, though. Really, the sweetest part of this story, I guess, is when you think about Cole there, and how he was he was sad about Vonnie, that she died, but especially the baby, how he just really wanted that, you know, he really wanted a son. And then when he seen this little, what she'd put in the paper, or someone told him about it, I don't know if the pastor told him about it or someone else did, since he couldn't write, I'm guessing he couldn't read either. But however he found out about it, that Robert, the little Robert, is what he was attracted to. And he didn't care what the mother had done. He didn't care that she'd been in prison. All he wanted to do was experience being a father for the little boy. So that's really sweet. And then even, of course, the icing on the cake is once she realizes that, you know, she said all through this that's just her one goal, is to get back to Robert, that she wants, that's what she's missed most of all, being in prison, was being separated from him. And even that was why she chose Cole's people that had responded to the little thing that her and the chaplain put in the paper there, that the other people like wanted to ask all these serious questions about Robert. And Cole's answer was just, you can bring the boy, no questions, nothing. I think that she said they had asked, you know, where was he at when you was in prison? Has he been to school? Does he know what you did? You know, is he sickly? Asking real details about him. So anyway, that was why she had chose Cole. But then when she realizes, she goes in the house and she sees the little bed and sees the cups on the table, the little cup and the little high chair that he's made and all those things, she realizes, and then she runs back outside and sees all the things he's bought. She realizes that he wanted the boy, but then that just makes her, as a mother, like, oh, it's all right. If you cared enough about him already to do all this, and you're going to give him a good life, it'll all be okay, you know. So it's really see a mother's love there in that part. Really heartwarming. So I hope you enjoyed the ending of this little love story. Now we'll have to tune back in next week to see what happens next, see who we get to hear about next. But please leave a comment and tell me what you enjoyed about this one. And if you're like me and you'd love to have seen that beautiful view from that high mountain meadow.